Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly 30-minute webinar. My name is Jim Schultens. I'm a systems engineer here at Verify, and I'll be your host for today's session. I'm joined today by my good friend, Victor Verba, another systems engineer here at Verify. Vic's going to show us how to use Verify's change management feature to monitor hard phone registration changes. How you doing today, Vic?
I'm doing well, Jim. How are you?
Good, good. Are you ready for Christmas? Got
I'm getting there, man. I'm
Got
wrapping
all those
presents.
presents wrapped and
No,
mine
not quite yet.
especially.
Not quite yet.
All right. All right. Please note that these webinars are always recorded and posted within 24 hours. So if you do have any questions or you do have to leave early or just want to be able to review it again at your own pace, check the webinars page on our website for all past and upcoming sessions. So on the agenda for today, we'll start off with a quick overview of our company and what we do. Then we'll jump into a live demo where Vic will take us into the change management feature. We'll leave some time for Q&A. So if you do have any questions during the presentation, make sure to enter them in the Q&A panel. After Q&A, we'll award one lucky attendee a $50 Amazon gift card. So make sure you hang around to see if you've won. All right, a quick overview of Verify. Verify is the preferred analytics and management solution for UC collaboration. Deployable either on-prem or as a hosted cloud solution, we provide industry-leading CDR reporting and call analytics, as well as customizable dashboards and widgets, UCCX reporting, remote phone control, change management, which is the topic of today's webinar, Cisco Cube CDR, and our latest addition, Zoom and WebEx call reporting. If you have any questions on any of our features, please contact us at support@verify.com or reach out to your account manager. One more thing before we get started here. For an additional fee, Verify offers an enhanced consulting service to our customers. Verify's SE team engages you on a one-on-one basis to remotely provide additional consulting, report building, dashboard configuration, and system monitoring assistance. This is a service that provides you a dedicated Verify SE to do the heavy lifting, giving you a stress-free, hands-off experience. For more information, please contact us or your account manager, and we'd be glad to speak with you more in depth about pricing and terms of service for ECS. All right. I'm going to hand things over to Vic now, so please remember, if you do have any questions, submit them in the Q&A panel, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Over to you, Vic.
All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you guys for joining us. Let me scoot some stuff off my screen here. So as Jim said, one of the things we're going to talk about today is how to leverage the change management package to kind of monitor some of the registration statuses of your phones. And we're not going to strictly stick to snapshots of comparison. We're also going to take a look at some of the as-built reports and how we can fine-tune those a little bit to monitor just kind of hard phones and hard phone registration statuses, and using what we call subsets to fine-tune a little bit of the content that you're looking for. To start off, I'm going to start talking a little bit about snapshots. Snapshots part of the change management package, and that's where we kind of go out, we take a picture of that call manager on a daily basis, or whatever your schedule may be. Snapshots are great because they give you a great historical accuracy, a historical count of what your call manager and how your call manager is configured in previous days, weeks, or months, depending on how many snapshots you decide to store. So they're a great resource to be able to go back to get additional information. Now, one of the things with snapshots is they have a couple different options when you're setting up your snapshot. They have the ability to go out and look at your IP phones, or not query all your IP phones. So if you're going to be using any of the IP-related as-built reports, you're going to want to make sure that this guy here is enabled in your as-built snapshot setup. In order for this to work, you do have to have web access on the phones enabled as well, because when we do go out and include IP phone information, that's going to be things like firmware, IP address, network configurations. We do need to talk to that phone in order to do that. In order for us to talk to that phone, obviously web access and HTTP or HTTPS need to be enabled. So if you're going to be building off of these snapshots, and I'll talk a little bit about it in a moment, you're going to want to make sure that that is enabled, at least for one of the reports that we'll go over today, and I'll make sure we specify which one that is. Right. So now that we talked a little bit about snapshots, I'm going to go ahead and move over to change management. I'm going to switch my cluster over here. I'm going to go to one of my Colorado clusters, and we're going to take a look at how we can do some comparisons and build some specific definitions on those comparisons, but then also schedule that to report to run on a daily basis. All right. So moving over to the comparison module, you're going to see that we can compare our snapshots, and we can compare those against a live running call manager, or we can compare snapshots against another snapshot. Essentially what this is going to do is it's going to outline all of the changes that took place in a call manager over a given time based on what you are comparing or the identity changes that you are looking for. All right. Now, in this case, for this particular report, we're not really interested in a report that's going to identify all the changes in my call manager. I'm really just looking for phone changes. And from a phone change perspective, I'm really just looking for changes from a registration standpoint. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to start off by creating a definition. So I'm going to move over to the edit comparisons and comparison definitions, and we're going to add a new definition. Definitions are very pinpoint parts of your call manager that you want to monitor. Much like an as-built, you have the ability to report all these. You also have the ability to determine which ones you want to compare for changes. This could come in handy if you want to be able to monitor things like translation patterns, route patterns, or in this case, things like phone registrations. So in my device category here, this is going to be all the device associated information, and you're going to see an option in here called IP phone registration. That's going to give you the ability to monitor just for IP phone registration changes. Now, this is also filterable, so I could just type in IP or I could type in registration, and it's going to bring up my IP phone registration. Now, we talked a little bit about that check mark that I was looking at previously regarding the IP phones and going out to the IP phones to query them. One thing else we'll say is for this particular report, you do not need that option enabled. So in other words, if you're trying to run a report on your phone registrations, we're going to pull this information directly from the call manager, not from the physical device. So you do not have to have web access enabled in order to be able to run the IP phone registration report. In other words, that check mark that we were looking at in the beginning of this call does not need to be toggled on for this particular report. And so all I'm going to do is move my comparison definition and scoot that guy off to the right. And of course, you can always add multiple definitions if you wanted to monitor for multiple things. You're not limited to just one. If I wanted to see if there were changes in my presence groups on this same report, I could do that. But in this case, we're going to keep it simple. It's got one purpose. The purpose is to monitor for phone registration changes. And I'm just going to call this registration changes, and we'll give that guy a save. So now essentially what we've done is we created a definition to monitor for one particular part of my phone system. You can create as many definitions as you want. There's no limit to the number of definitions. You can see this is a pretty popular one, route patterns and translation patterns, along with end users, registration lines, and locations. All right. Now that we have a comparison definition created, what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and apply that definition to our change management or our comparison. So let me switch back over to my Colorado cluster here, and I'll show you two different ways to do this. One, we could absolutely run this ad hoc. If I just said, hey, you know what, I want to see all the phone registration changes from yesterday to today, I can go ahead and select my two comparison snapshots. I could select my registration change definition. That is the one we just created. And I could go ahead and generate that report. What this is going to do is going to go ahead and kick out a report that identified any registration changes from yesterday to today. All right, that's great. Right now we have a couple of soft phones in here because really that's all I had to unregister in my environment. What you would see here from your perspective is any phone in your organization that may have become registered then unregistered, or vice versa, that may have been unregistered and then registered the next day. Now, keep in mind, this is going off of snapshots. You could also run this off of your live running call manager if you wanted to run this off your live running call manager. Now, so how do we use this as kind of a monitoring tool? You don't want to have to come in here and run this all the time. That's a bit cumbersome, but you want to be able to go ahead and get a report if there are some registration changes. That's what's most important to me, is not necessarily did something occur, I kind of want to know if I have a problem or if there are a block of phones or a series of phones that are becoming unregistered. And honestly, I'd like to know in the morning rather than in the afternoon when somebody's calling and asking me why their phone doesn't work. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and schedule a comparison. So to do that, I'm going to pop over to the Schedule Comparisons module here. And we're going to load this guy up, and we're going to create a comparison schedule. So the first thing we do is everybody should be used to the little green plus when we're adding new schedules or new search criteria. We're going to go ahead and enable this guy. And we're going to select the cluster we want to run the comparison against. And we're also going to have the option to select the definition. Now, I can include the in-kitchen sink and show all of the changes that took place in my call manager. Or in this case, I can go ahead and include just the registration changes definition. Again, this is the definition that we created in the beginning of our steps. The next thing we want to do is we want to decide what data we want to compare this against. So we have the before data source. In other words, what is my latest data source? And in that case, I'm going to use the second most recent snapshot. And the reason we're going to use the second most recent snapshot is because of the timing that we're going to run this report. So before I schedule this, let's take a look back. So we have our snapshots running, and they're running on an automated basis. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at what time our snapshots run. Looks like they run around 2 o'clock in the morning. So they finish up around 2:12. So I know every day around 2:15, I'm going to have a snapshot of my most current environment. Right? So when I'm changing or I'm creating my schedules, you've got a couple different options. I'm going to go ahead, and in my case, what I like to do is I like to create the schedules and run the comparisons off of snapshots. You don't have to, but when you're running something off a snapshot, it runs considerably faster because that's already housed in the Verify system. We're not going out to the call manager to gather all this information. So when I schedule my report, I'm going to go ahead and run it against the second most recent snapshot, and I'm going to compare it against the most recent snapshot. All right. So in other words, if I were to run this at, say, 1 o'clock in the morning prior to my snapshot running, I'm probably getting some old information because now it's going to be going and running against the snapshot from the previous day and then today's snapshot. But when I go ahead and schedule this, I'm going to schedule this to run after my snapshots. In other words, I've got a brand new, crisp, clean snapshot to run it off of, and that's what I want to compare it against. It's essentially, because I'm running it right after my snapshot ran, the same thing as running it against my live current environment. However, it's going to run 10 times faster against a snapshot than having to go out and query my call manager and gather all that information again. And who knows what backups are running at that time that may be slowing things down as well. So what I like to do is schedule it to run against the most recent, second most recent snapshot, compare that against the most recent snapshot, but then schedule that guy to run after my snapshots run. That's going to be a great way to be able to automate this, but also keep it clean, keep it running fast, so that way it's not having to go out to the call manager and gather this information. There's a couple other settings in here like snapshot minimum age, snapshot maximum age. We're not really concerned with that. We're really just concerned about running these two. Now, if I was running this at midnight, well, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and run it against the most recent snapshot, and then I'm going to run it against my current live config. Why? Because my most recent snapshot is the one that ran yesterday at 2 a.m. But that's because I'm running it at 1 o'clock in the morning prior to my snapshot running. So we're going to go ahead and make those changes. You can see our schedule here. You decide how you want this to run, whether you want to run daily, every day of the month. That's predominantly up to you and how you want to monitor your environment. And the next thing we're going to decide how we want to deliver this report. You can deliver it via email or via FTP or SFTP. We're going to choose our email recipients here. And in this case, we'll have it go to support@verify.com. Now, the next thing we want to do is understand what this guy does. It's pretty straightforward, but it's also the difference between you getting a blank report and a report that has content in it. Essentially, what we're going to do is this comparison is going to run every day. Now, if I leave this unselected and there were no registration changes on those phones, I'm going to get a report that I got to open, and it's going to be blank. But But if I toggle this guy on, that means I'm only going to get a report if there were registration changes on phones. So this button right here is the difference of me having to look at something every day to see if there were changes, to me getting a report only if changes were made. So it's a powerful little option because a lot of people will use this not just for IP phone or phone registration, but to monitor things like application users or enterprise parameter changes or translation pattern changes. I don't need to see a report every day if somebody changes an enterprise parameter, or in this case, doesn't change an enterprise parameter. I only want to see if that change got made and what that change is. So this is an important guide to decide really how you like your workflow. Do you want to open something up every day to see if there was a change, or do you only want to get something if there was a change? In this case, I really only want to get a report if there was a change. And then we'll give that guy a save. And that's it. Essentially what we've done is we've automated a report, change management, that's going to go out every day, review for any phone registration changes, and then output a report that's going to identify those changes, similar to the one that we did manually when we ran that comparison. This guy right here. So great thing about that is now you've set it, you could forget it. You're going to get a report only when a registration status changes. All right, but that doesn't necessarily address how do we see just hard phones. One of the things with the comparison module is it's not really filterable based on different models of phones, different types of phones, different device pools. There's a lot that goes into that, you know, with as far as where a phone resides. But it doesn't mean you still can't get information based on specific types of phones, models of phones, device pools, or even specific phones. And that's where the as-built's going to come in. So we're going to switch gears a little bit away from comparison. Now that we've seen snapshots, we've seen how to set up the comparison, we understand what the report's going to look like. Let's go ahead and shift gears a little bit and take a look at how we can leverage as-built as well as CUCM subsets to search just for my hard phones and find just the ones that have registrations or unregistered, and then filter those down to see really just what you're looking for. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over to my as-built section. All right. Now, if I run an as-built report, I can run an existing report very similar to what we did in snapshots. We created that definition. We can create definitions in as-built reporting as well. I can also run those ad hoc. So much like we saw with the comparisons, I can go ahead and search this field and I'll be able to find down this list. I probably should do a different one. We'll do IP phone registration. I can run a report. This is going to go ahead and output a report, and I'll use a snapshot again. We'll make this quicker, of all of the registration statuses of all my phones cluster-wide. I have to give the report a title here. We'll just give this guy test. And here we go. Move that guy over. And essentially what this is a report cluster-wide of all of my phones and all of the statuses of all of my phones for that particular cluster. All right. Not extremely helpful if you've got 10,000 devices and you're really just looking for hard phones or something like that. So what we're going to do is, one, I'm going to switch back to my cluster that has some hard phones. Let's do that first. One, we want to basically filter this report down. And maybe we want to go ahead and schedule this guy to run on an automatic basis. But first thing first is we're going to go ahead and create a definition very similar to the definition we created for change management. We're going to go ahead and edit an as-built report. And you can see we've got a bunch of them in here. We actually have one created already, but for giggles here, we're going to go ahead and create a new one. And you'll notice that, again, this is pretty common to what we saw before. I'll call it phone reg 2, and we'll just do the IP phone registration here. All right, so very similar to what we had before, but we're just creating that for our change management, and we're specifically for our as-built. All right, so now that we have that, we can go through, and rather than having to select the option, we can go ahead and just pick the report. Now that gives us a couple different options. One, that gives us the option to automate that, so it will always run for our IP phone registration. And two, it's going to give us the ability to go ahead and just easily click and just pick our phone reg 2. All right, but that doesn't help us yet. We still want to maybe just whittle this down a little bit. Maybe we just want to see our hard phones, or maybe we just want to see soft phones. In order to get that much more finite, we have to create what's called a CUCM subset. So if I navigate to the gear off to the right-hand side over here, you're going to see under the system column, CUCM subsets. Subsets are basically a way of filtering as-built reports. So we're going to click our little plus button that we should all be used to, and that's going to bring us into the subset screen where we can then build out a subset. I'm going to call this one hard phones only. We can give it a description here if we want, but you'll see some options. Let's say, for example, I only wanted to do hard phones for my Denver device pool. Well, then I could choose just Denver. Maybe I just wanted to see all phones in my Denver device pool. So you've got a couple different ways to filter this information out. Alternatively, we are looking for hard phones. And Cisco's got a lot of models of hard phones, and I honestly do not want to get into having to pick which ones are in my environment. So we're going to simplify that a little bit more by just using some of the description or the contextual values here. So in other words, I know from at least in my environment and most of your environments, most of my hard phones are going to start with SEP. Easy enough. I've basically just created a subset that is for all my SEP devices. Alternatively, you can filter that down more. Maybe I want certain hard phones that just have a certain device description. A lot of us use device descriptions to define our branches or our clinics or our different sites. So we can use those device descriptions to help whittle that list down even more. Or perhaps it's different device pools that help define some of those sites or those locations. You have multiple ways to be able to filter these guys down. So I'm going to give that guy a save, and you'll see now we have our new subset here. If we wanted to take a look, we can actually view the phones in that subset. If you're looking at like 10,000 phones, you may be hesitant to click that button. You may be sitting there for a little while because it will go ahead and render a lot of phones on the screen here. So just a word of caution, if you're going to go ahead and try to see all your phones through the screen, there's better ways to do that, specifically using the snapshots. But now that we have our subset, we're going to pop back over to change management, and I'm going to navigate back to my Colorado cluster here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use as-built. So from the as-built menu, we can schedule the as-built report, but now I can go ahead and run a report. In other words, I'm going to run our phone reg 2 in a CSV format against the snapshot, and we'll pick yesterday's snapshot, but now I have an option to do a subset and choose my hard phones only. Essentially what we're now doing is we're isolating not just the soft phones or removing all the soft phones, and we are isolating this down to just your hard phones. Nice, easy to read, easy to sort Excel file to whittle down anything you want from registration status to registration dates and times. Again, keeping in mind that these registration date and times are coming from the call manager. So these are when the last change took place from the registration. You will notice a lot of unknowns in here. Unknown is set by the call manager. So after a certain threshold where a phone is unregistered, it will go to an unknown status. That is a configuration that can be changed on call manager. I want to say the default is something like 30 minutes, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. Right. But now what we have is a way to be able to whittle down to just our hard phones, show the registrations, easily summarize how many are registered, unknown, and if I had some that were unregistered, it would show how many were unregistered as well. So great way to be able to simplify that and see just those particular hard phones, whether they were registered or not registered. So the next thing you may want to do is schedule this report. So much like scheduling a snapshot comparison, you could do the same thing from a as-built report. One, you'll select your cluster. You're going to select the report that we created or the phone registration report. And you're going to decide whether you want this to run cluster-wide or, again, here's that subset we're talking about. So let's add our subset in there. And now essentially what we've done is decided to schedule a report that's going to look at the phone registration, look at my hard phones only, and then deliver that through our normal timeframes. Via email or through a report. All right. So Jim, before I talk about anything else, I know we are running low on time. Do we have any questions or anything here?
Nothing popped in yet, Vic. So
all right.
If you do have any questions, just post them now. We'll get those answered.
All right. So last thing I'm going to go ahead and talk about, Jim, and this is a little bit away from registration and unregistration or non-registered phones, and it's on the same thing of just kind of call manager cleanup and getting an understanding of really what's being used in your call manager or not in your call manager. And we've done some webinars on this guy before, so definitely feel free to check those out if you want a more in-depth view. And that is the dormant phones report. Sometimes it's not just a matter of whether something is registered or unregistered. Maybe you're just trying to clean up your environment. The registration and unregistration registration reports or change management reports are a great way to get a handle on that environment. And that's a great way of identifying phones that maybe they should be working and just aren't and need to be addressed. But a lot of times, besides just looking at that status, it's also important to just understand what phones are in your environment that aren't potentially being used at all. When we start to talk about cleanup, when we start to talk about managing our environment, or even doing things like migrations to cloud-based premises, a lot of times you're going to need to know what phones do I have that are actually being used, which ones do I need to cut over. That's not always just registration and unregistered. That's also where something like a dormant phones report could come in. Something that's going to be able to go out to your phone system, cross-reference all call data, and then provide a report of all the phones that haven't been used in a quarter, a week, a month, 2 months, or even a year, giving you a good idea of, hey, do these phones actually need to be in production? Are these legitimate phones, or is there something in my call manager that just didn't get removed? If you're migrating to something like a cloud-based platform, these are the things that we should be looking at to determine what we actually need to migrate versus what's in our call manager. So this is a great report. Again, a little bit outside of the box, not focused on registration and unregistered, but more really focused in on that same thing. What are my devices doing? How many calls are we not receiving? What phones can I take out of production that may not be just getting used in a year or 6 months? All right. So with that, Jim, I think that's about all I've got. If there are any questions, I guess we can field those now. Otherwise, I'll pass the ball back to you.
All right. Yeah, nothing came in.
Great.
We can.
All right. Go ahead and stop sharing here, and I'll let you take your screen back.
I can grab it there, I think. All right. I want to thank you all again for attending today. We appreciate you made time in your busy schedules to join us. Our next session will be on December 20th, and it'll be a little bit different format. We're going to have a holiday roundtable discussion with Brian as Santa Claus and Dre and Mike as his elves. So get your questions ready. They'll be ready to answer a lot of your questions. And you won't want to miss this one. So thanks, everyone. We look forward to next time.
Thanks, guys.